You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 135.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, violinist, teacher, and high-performance coach for musicians, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special live podcast recording of the Mind Over Finger podcast. We're here live in the Mind Over Finger community with the incredible Aubrey Bergauer, who's a pillar in arts leadership. Aubrey, on your website, you mentioned how classical music is your vehicle to advance society, and you're definitely making waves. Much needed waves, I might add, in the classical music world. You're such a force in our industry, and I've been so inspired by you and your message and the profound impact you're having for the future of classical music. I've been looking forward and been so excited to have this discussion with you today. So thank you so much for taking the time in your busy schedule to be with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Those are really kind words. It means a lot. So thank you for having me, Renee.
I'm only going to say a couple of things before we dive in. First, to invite all of you who are here live with us, or those of you who are listening to the episode on the Mind Over Finger podcast, to visit Aubrey's website at aubreybergauer.com. And I'm going to have those links in the show notes, of course. And there you can read her astute and impactful blog and her articles. Also, make sure you listen and subscribe to her podcast, The Offstage Mic, the business side of arts and culture, where she aims to, and I'm quoting, shake up the old ways of arts management and compose a different tune. And I definitely want to hear all about that, Aubrey, what that looks like to compose a different tune in arts management in 2022. And the second and last thing is to invite everyone who's watching live to put in your questions in the comments, and I'm going to pass them on to Aubrey as we go. Okay, enough introduction. Aubrey, I would like to start with you the same way I start with all my guests on the podcast, and I would love to hear your story in your own words. So can you please tell us about your journey, how it unfolded, and how you got to where you are today?
I grew up playing an instrument like so many of you watching and listening. And I was one of kind of those kids is what I normally say. I played in my, first high school band, private lessons, very dedicated. And then eventually when I was in 8th grade, the youth orchestra. I grew up in Houston. And I played the tuba, which I don't look like a tuba player, but girl on tuba was like breaking stereotypes, totally something that now I look back and I'm like, yeah, that tracks. So tuba player, pretty into it. And in 8th grade, I won the audition for the youth orchestra. By sophomore year of high school, so a couple of years later, they went through an executive director change and they introduced the new person to us before rehearsal one day. Didn't say much, like a sentence or less, but it was enough for me to really have that light bulb moment of, oh, there's a job managing all of this. That's the job I want. And so from that point on, I mean, I continued to be very serious about my instrument, concerto competition, again, one of those kids. And, but knew when I was going to college that I wanted to go somewhere where I could double major in music performance as well as business. So went to Rice, did the double degree, and first job out of college was Seattle Symphony in fundraising. After a little while, the Seattle Opera called and said, come run our young patrons program. So I went to the Seattle Opera to do that. Started really growing that young patrons program. That's where I started putting into place a lot of the ideas that I've become known for now. So just testing on a small scale as that scope would allow. That was the same time when digital was really starting to come into the forefront. So, I was like a 26-year-old person saying, I got a new thing. It's called an iPhone. Let me run ads for this. Let's look at our mobile first website. Like those weren't words we used a lot in the mid 2000s. So through that really became data driven, became just really aware of how embracing trends and technology can help us as organizations, help elevate the brand. And so stayed there for several years doing all of that as that role really continued to grow and change. And then, and was overseeing the subscription campaign at one point. So really, again, just got to do a whole lot of things there. Went after that, stayed in Seattle, went to the Bumbershoot Music and Arts Festival, was the number 2 there over all of revenue. So now I'm putting together, first hired on as marketing director and then promoted over development and marketing as well. So that was the next sort of milestone where I got to really start putting together ideas of how marketing and development work together and aren't necessarily pitted against each other, which can happen in our institutions. And I had seen it at the prior 2 places I had worked on both sides, on development and marketing side. And then 2014 is when I moved to the Bay Area and took a job at this little orchestra called the California Symphony. And, I'd cut my teeth at these major institutions. And then this regional orchestra called and said, we really want to do some things differently. We hear you might be moving here. Some personal things going on that I had put that out in the ether that I wanted to move to San Francisco. And there was enough right about the organization that I thought I can raise money for this. And also important was that the board said, no, we know we need to do it differently. They were in total financial crisis. It was a turnaround situation. And I now say the silver lining of crisis is that there tends to be more of an appetite for change because we know that pain is so much that we're ready to take a risk that maybe we wouldn't take a risk otherwise if things were comfortable. So, 2014 is where things really started changing for me. Here we go. I get the seniority I had wanted. And I decided that I would make that organization my testing ground to really, from the top as executive director over everything, put together all of these different building blocks I had been building opinions on, even since I was that little girl playing the tuba in the back of the orchestra. And the end of the story is we doubled the audience, nearly quadrupled the donor base. I started blogging about it along the way, and that started really gaining traction and national visibility for us. So to bring us to the present, I left that job in 2019, almost exactly 3 years ago now. And I left because it was like the side hustle became the main hustle. Other organizations started reaching out, help us achieve the same kind of growth, help us look at audience development in this new way that you have. And I thought, I think the next move, instead of going right to run another orchestra again, will be to have this broader impact on the industry. So 3 years in, that's what I've been doing. And here we are. So that's the story.
That's a great story. I love how all of these elements are coming together to create this perfect little magical sandbox where you could play and experiment. And you said at the beginning that it was kind of from an early age breaking the mold, and it's perfect how it just happened that they needed something that was breaking the mold and something that was innovative. And it's just so insightful and interesting for me to see how all of these things came together. And thanks for sharing. And I'm curious to hear from you right now as we are tentatively stepping out of the pandemic. What do you see as being the current reality of the classical music industry?
Well, the current reality is not great. I will caveat this by saying I believe that there is a better future for us, and that maybe segues into some of the podcasts as well. But my own podcast. But the bad, we'll do bad news first, and then end on a high note. The bad news is audiences have not returned to pre-pandemic levels. The latest national statistic I heard was somewhere, I think 65 to 70% of pre-pandemic audiences is where most organizations, classical music organizations, lie. And we know that on the whole, pre-pandemic, we were already seeing declines in audiences. The League of American Orchestras reported that at 2.8% decline a year, pre-pandemic. This is pre-pandemic data. So the pandemic accelerated almost every trend imaginable, not just in classical music, but in the entire world we live in. And so that is true for us too. The reality beforehand was that audiences were on the decline. subscriptions on the decline, aging, all of that, the pandemic really thrust that forward. And so here we are. And it's funny, I did an exercise in, was it late 2020? I think it was late 2020, maybe early 21, like still like kind of in the pre-vaccine, in the thick of quarantine still. I did this exercise doing this graph, mapping out, okay, if we were declining at 2.8% a year, and some experts had projected the acceleration of all trends would be 10 years. What if you mapped out that projection? And that math at the time said that we would have like 56% of our audiences back or something like that. Well, now the reality is 65 to 70. So it wasn't as bleak as just a straight linear regression would have suggested, but that's the bad news.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think we should have been surprised by that because we had that trend in place already. Okay. Like I said, that's the bad news. The good news is that trends are reversible. And this is what almost all of my work in all of those different roles has shown. I've been able to buck trends time and again. And whether that was bucking the trend, back at Seattle Opera of, no, we don't have to do print for everything. Yes, we can invest in this new digital format, which now we look at and we're like, duh, but back then it was this different thing. And, social media, I had to really convince people back then to launch the social media channels for that organization, things we just take for granted now. Okay, fast forward, focusing on retention, that became very important, especially at my work at the Bumbershoot Music and Arts Festival. I really doubled down on that at the California Symphony. And now here we are, and retention is like the word of the day. We talk about getting our audiences back. That's a different language to say we need to retain them. So trends can be reversed is the point. And that's the good news. But trends are not reversed on their own. Yeah. Trends are only reversed when there's some outside force helping that change happen. And so that is the change that now more and more I'm working with organizations to achieve.
And I'm really going to invite the listeners to go and check out all of the amazing resources you have on your website. You did a really great profile on your work with the California Symphony that was showing some of the things you're talking about right now. And it's great to hear from you that those trends are reversible.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody goes to my website, you want to see graphs and numbers. The most read still to this day blog post I ever wrote was the long haul model on audience development, audience retention. And you can see the national stats compared to what we did at the California Symphony. And to your point, it shows, yes, those trends can be reversed. It's like nationwide, something's going down, we made it go up, so I just believe in my heart of hearts that we can definitely reverse the bad news.
Yeah. And we want this to happen in a way that doesn't affect negatively the product, which is the quality of the musical output, which sometimes we see they'll increase the number of concerts and reduce the number of rehearsals. And I think that is not long-term thinking.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's so interesting about my work is that the focus is not on changing the product. This is not, and I've had success with that approach. And so I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but we tend as an industry to over-focus on tinkering with the product as a potential solution to the challenges we face. Like you described, it's, adding more performances or cutting rehearsals as a cost-saving measure, or let's program more props and movie concerts. Yeah, exactly. And so it's not that those things don't sell. We know what does well at the box office. Let's play some more Beethoven and Harry Potter, and we'll go right to the bank on that. But what the problem is that doesn't reverse the trends. People come to those shows and then drop off again. And there's data after data, mountains of data after data that shows this. So instead, what I have really focused on is when we focus on audience retention, when we focus on changing the customer experience, let's make it less intimidating, let's make it welcoming, let's create a sense of belonging. When we do those things, when we focus on diversity and representation, like all of those things together, we start growing the audience and creating demand for this product. And when we have that, we are liberated in terms of our artistic choices, because we don't have to be so beholden to the Beethoven, Brahms, Harry Potter, pops, whatever. So this is so important that repertoire alone is not the way forward. We have also mountains of data suggesting that. So I think it's so important that we, to your point that you were making, hold our artistic integrity at the highest standard. And we can do both of those things simultaneously, growth and artistic excellence.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to invite again, those of you watching us, if you want to put in your questions in the comment, I'll pass them to Aubrey. Aubrey, something I would really love to hear from you is your thoughts on what musicians can do now to have a positive impact in their own musical communities and on the future of the music industry in general. Of course, everyone has a different experience and situation, and I don't want to generalize, but I do think that in many cases, it can happen for us performers to feel at the mercy of the organizations we work for. We can feel limited in what we can do to impact that vibrancy of our community, what we can concretely do to draw audiences in. We often feel powerless to move the needle in a truly significant way. And of course, a lot of our time is dedicated to hone in on our skills, to stay on top of the repertoire so we can do our part, the playing at the highest level. So it's not as if we're just, idling by and waiting for a paycheck, but I'm sure there are ways for us to be more engaged with how music is shared with the audience and how we can get this audience to come to us, both for the projects we're hired for, the orchestras and organization we work for, both as freelancers or full-time players, and also the projects that we put together. So what advice do you have for us?
I love this question. Thank you for asking this question. I have 3 ideas, 3 pieces of advice. Everybody take it or leave it as you'd like. So the first is social media. I don't know if that sounds silly or trite or not, but I'm going to give an analogy of a different business for this one. I've been super fascinated by Peloton. So if you're a Peloton fan, you're probably like, yeah. If you're not, you're like, oh God, here we go. But what Peloton does very well that I want classical music to do better is they leverage their talent. For them, it's instructors. For us, that would be our artists online incredibly well. So for example, at the end of classes, they're not saying follow Peloton on social media. They're saying follow me, and they add their handle. And what that has done for Peloton is, I forget the exact numbers, the instructor talent Instagram accounts, for example, is, I forget, millions and millions combined. There's like 50 instructors and combined, all these millions of followers. The brand account, Peloton brand account, is like 1/5 of that total following of everybody else. And so these instructors, they're not just saying in all their social media channels, all their Peloton stuff all the time. They're living their lives like the way any of us do on Instagram. They're working in the garden. They're cooking dinner, they're, whatever their other hobbies are. And it has added so much brand, I don't know, like rabid fandom, because we connect with people. Mm-hmm. Humans connect with other humans more than we connect with a business or brand any day of the week. And so they've done this exceptionally well. And then I think of something like an orchestra or an opera company, or even a smaller ensemble, or even solopreneurs. So many musicians are solopreneurs or freelancers or whatever. You have so much power that the brand doesn't have. And I so badly want us to find a way to better harness this. So if you have any inclination to be active on social media, please, please, please do it. I know that's not for everyone, but if that is your inclination, don't hold back is what I'm trying to say. Okay, that's thing 1. Piece of advice number 2 is auditions. So this goes back to diversity, representation, and I really think our audition process has ways it can change to be more equitable, more fair. The statistics for orchestras in America, if you don't know, are that 2% of professional musicians are Black or brown. And that's under indexing on the amount of Black and brown talent that's out there. More than that is graduating from top music schools every year. More than that are taking auditions. But, when things like when the screen comes down at the end, that's allowing a visual bias to creep in, whether we want to or not. It just happens. Again, we're humans. So we have to think about that. We need to consider, even if we're not going to have the argument over screen up or down, we need to consider who are we inviting to auditions. We invite people to auditions all the time. So let's be more intentional about who we are inviting to come, things like that. So we need that kind of change. When I'm talking about audition process, I'm very aware that I'm management talking about an artistic issue. And so I don't want that to come from somebody like me. I want these changes to come from excellent artists who also see and have a better viewpoint than I do on how can we improve processes like audition process, tenure process, a whole nother category. We could talk about how do we make this more fair, more equitable. By doing that, that is a step that helps us become more representative of the community around us. So that's thing 2. Thing 3, I've now forgotten. Great. It was really good, I'm sure. This is why I'm
number 4.
Please edit that out. I did think of it, but
okay, let's hear it.
I was just going to say the third thing, this is shorter. Be involved. I was talking about retention and centering our customer. So be involved in that. What does that mean? It means, and this is where you have to really evaluate how much time are you going to volunteer back to the organization, or maybe organizations can come up with a pay structure for this. But things like, when we need to call donors and say thank you, the number one reason donors don't renew is they feel like they're not thanked enough. It was so funny to me. I just got to share this story. At the California Symphony, I would call donors as executive director and thank them all the time. And they'd be like, oh yeah, great. Happy to support. Anytime I got musicians, board members too, but musicians especially, to help call and thank donors or donors at a certain level that we really wanted to give that extra special touch point. Oh my gosh, they could care less. They couldn't care less who I was. They would get so excited. And then I kid you not, even one time it was thank you notes, not calls. Some orchestra members wrote some thank you notes. We gave them the stationery stamps, talking points, wrote these donor thank you letters. I started getting thank you notes back at the office from the donor saying, thank you notes and calls from the donor saying, oh my gosh, I got the best note from the violist. Oh my gosh, not the next concert where you point them out to me. It's just, I was like, okay, hi, I'm Aubrey. Hi, but They didn't care about me. So all to say, things like that, just again, the power that artists have is just so great. And I'm not endorsing free labor. Like I said, there could be a pay structure for this type of work, but I don't know. It's just so valuable is what I'm trying to say.
It's that connection, this direct access to the musicians from the patron's perspective, and also giving a chance to the musicians to thank the patrons and the donors.
Yeah.
It was interesting what you said about social media, because one thing I see a lot around me and that I also feel at times is this fear of sharing, that we might be, we might feel like we're showing off for our colleagues. So there is sometimes a certain reserve from musicians to share openly about their activities on social media. But I think that you're right. It is so important. Someone who does this so well is Holly Mulcahy, who was a guest on the podcast in episode 4, where anytime she posts, I want to fly to, Kansas and go listen to her perform. She does this so brilliantly, and she really is good at creating this connection between the music, the musicians, the location, the coffee shop near the hall. All of this is just so, what you said, it creates this energetic, vibrancy where people really feel like they're fans.
Yes, exactly. And I agree. I think Holly does this brilliantly. I think she's brilliant in so many ways. And I mean, how many people then go to a concert and want to see her? Mm-hmm. They're not thinking about Maestro necessarily. They're not thinking about the hall or whatever else we normally do in our brand marketing. They're thinking, I want to see her. And it's not just, I want to see her play. Like they're just interested in her as a person. And that's, as you said, that's exactly the connection. Yeah.
So that's going to be my challenge that I I give all of us, if you're listening and you're a professional musician, is how excited are you about your next concert, and share about it on social media.
Yeah.
What else do you see in terms of pitfalls? What do you commonly see out there and things that we could stop doing?
We being musicians, or we being institutions, or all of the above?
Yeah, maybe all of the above, both organizations and musicians. So some of these pitfalls that you most commonly see in our industry.
Yeah, let's think here. Well, this is a pitfall. I don't know if it's something we need to stop, but the pitfall is the lack of data.
Mhm.
And it's not to say that the data isn't out there. So I guess so there's nuance to this answer. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of data we have as organizations, even small organizations have some sort of data, even if you're so little it's on a spreadsheet, like you've at least got patron records of some sort. So we're collectively, and this is not universally true, but collectively pretty bad at harnessing that data.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what tends to happen, is then we tend to blast everybody with every message. Come to the next concert, make a donation. Okay, if somebody's only been once and then it's been like several months since they came, don't ask them for a donation. That's not the right next step. So it's things like that where we need to be, that's using our data for segmentation is what I'm describing. There's also data of, I don't know, we get so, again, painting with a broad brush, but we get so concerned about, well, what if we make some changes to the experience? What if we tell people they can have their phones on, but don't take video? Like, what's going to happen? Well, is our core audience going to leave? And I don't mean to be controversial with phones on or off, but I'm using it as an example to say that the core audience is not going to leave. Because we can use data to answer this. The data shows that once somebody is a renewing subscriber for 3 years or longer, those renewal rates are like 90% or higher. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's a first-time attendee, it's the opposite. 9 out of 10, 90% don't come back. So it's like we're overly concerned about the long-time loyal subscriber, and yet we're like bleeding out new people. Mm-hmm. And yet here we are saying we need new audiences. So when we look at a question, again, maybe I don't mean to pick a controversial example like phones on or off, but when we look at a question like that, like, let's look at the data. Who are we alienating, and what can that cost us right now? So things like that are what I'm trying to say. We can be better at data. I'm trying to think if there are other pitfalls. I already blasting to everybody. I already said that, overly communicating. I'll keep thinking. That's a big one for me though, is just not having a culture of data always, or thinking about, there's a bias about this, but where we overweight an anecdote over the numbers. Well, one donor is so cranky, and Mr. So-and-so, he said he's going to stop giving if we do this. Okay, if Mr. So-and-so is a mega major donor, that's one thing, because sadly the reality is we overly rely on those major donors. Mm-hmm. But if Mr. So-and-so is not that big of a donor, don't overweight that story so much, because it's one gift. And I mean, I give this example of the California Symphony. People people complain about the changes you made. I had one super cranky, this is a subscriber, not a donor, come up to me in the lobby, super cranky at a performance one day, saying, if you tell people to clap when they like what they hear one more time. So there we go. Not phones, applause, when to applaud. We said, clap when you like what you hear. If you tell people to applaud one more time, I'm out of here. And you heard me say we doubled our audience. And in my head, I'm like, what does the data show? What do the numbers show? We doubled our audience. I'll take that trade of losing one person any day of the week. So don't overweight the story is what I'm trying to hear. Go back to, what are we seeing in our actual numbers here? So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah. What are some of these things that you see that turn audience away after their first experience? Or, I mean, you talk about this so well on your website too. So again, if you're listening to this, go on Aubrey's website and read all of these articles. But in a nutshell, some of these things that work really well and make it inviting for audiences.
A lot of it I've learned is the words we use. So copy on our website, copy in the program book, even social media to a degree. we do a couple things. We did this user experience research project at the California Symphony. The article on that is the Orchestra X project for anybody who wants to go find it on my website. What we found were things like newcomer audience feedback about like, wow, you have so much words on the page, so many words on the page. It's very hard to like parse that out. They're like, I remember them saying, we did this research in 2016 and this was pre-election. They were like, we're used to reading 140 characters about Trump and Hillary, like, and yet you've got paragraphs and paragraphs on your website. This is not a political statement. It's just what they were saying about like the bite-sized information they wanted.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, right. Okay, got it. Let's pare that down big time. Just keep the most interesting bits. Another thing is we learned from that same project that a lot of newcomers have a real knowledge gap. So we, as the company, would use words like, well, just think about the words on any program: overture, concerto, full symphonic work. Overture, maybe they didn't always know that meant, probably like a 10-minute piece of music. They didn't know that. Concerto, they did not know, so that meant soloist with the orchestra. These words that we just use all the time and we know them, they didn't know. And it's because this stuff is not taught in school anymore. So these were not super young. These were millennials and Gen Xers. So all the way up into their 30s and 40s. And just didn't know because it wasn't taught. So then some of them didn't even know all the names of the instruments in the orchestra. Like that for me was such a mind-blowing moment. I can't remember not knowing the names in the orchestra, of the names of all the instruments in the orchestra. And so they don't know that. So then they read a word like instrumentation. Now I'm thinking program book, instrumentation, 222, or what, and no way. And so those things meant there was a disconnect, and it meant it translated to the emotions of, they felt intimidated, they felt unwelcome, they didn't know the unspoken rules about when to applaud. That's why we later changed it to just clap when you like what you hear. They just didn't know. And so because of that, felt isolated and felt unwelcome. And then the diversity piece definitely came up. That, like I said, this was 2016. This was long before the EDI conversation at the forefront today. And they were like, wow, I remember somebody saying, for a place that prides itself on culture, I look around and feels pretty uncultured.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that cuts. Yeah. So anyways, just so much we learned. And so it's a knowledge gap, and it is our job as institutions, I say now, and I believe I had to change my own thinking on this, to fill in that knowledge gap so that newcomers come and say, this is a place where I am welcome, no matter my knowledge or prior experience with this art form. This is a place where I will learn something and come away knowing more than how I entered, and not in a snooty way, but in a way that smart people want to learn. So,
yeah.
And then I will feel something too. I will finish this ending also on good news, which is when we talked about the music itself with these newcomers, awe was the emotion they almost all were universally shared. So it goes right back to, the product is not the thing we need to be over tinkering with.
Yeah. It goes back to the connection and understanding the person we're trying to connect with, how it's going to be received by them, and how it's going to make them feel.
Yes, how it's going to make them feel 100%. Yeah.
I saw a post you put in recently about someone trying to navigate a website to buy some tickets. And I've experienced the same thing. And I feel like that's another thing, is how easy can we make it for audiences to find that information, as you were saying, but also, buy a ticket and show up there. I mean, many things could be said about Jeff Bezos, but the one-click purchase is a brilliant move.
That's right. And there's research that backs this up too. This is Zoe Chance at Yale. She's at the Yale School of Management. Her research underscores this. She has said in some of her work that she's published the number one indicator of a customer purchase decision is ease. More than price. We talk about prices a lot in classical music. Are we charging too much? Are we accessible? More than price, more than, I forget what else. What are other things we consider? More than schedule, more than, if it was a tangible thing, more than color, right? More than all these other things, ease is the number one indicator of patron behavior. And the easier it is we make something to do, the more likely people are to do it, period. And so, yep, one-click purchase, good. So many times at orchestras, we make it very challenging to select a seat, figure out, oh God, the newcomers, back to that same research study at California Symphony, where some of them were like, I guess A is the first row. I'm not totally sure. And I was realizing, right, okay, no judgment. They haven't been to a theater a million times like the rest of us have, I guess. I don't know. But, just things like that, where it's like, when we don't make it very clear or very clear on the seat map that the stage is right in front of row A, it just makes it difficult. And this particular example that you were citing that I posted about, it was a major, major institution. And my friend was like, I cannot buy the damn ticket on my phone. And I just think it's inexcusable in 2022.
Yeah.
We're losing people. That's why it's inexcusable. We're losing people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think also for us as musicians and educators and parents and neighbors is, how can we invest in, I know you're big on the long-term effect. So how can we nurture the future audiences and really bring our kids to concert and keep teaching young kids and make music really exciting for these younger generations?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think so much of what we already said is true. If mom and dad feel welcome, they can bring their younger ones with them. I remember I've worked multiple places where there was a rule about who is old enough to come to a concert, and it's like, okay, not every 5-year-old acts the same. First of all, 2, can we let mom and dad have some discretion over this? 3, no, we don't want anybody wailing or being just, so disruptive that it's a problem. But also, this goes back to creating a place that's welcoming too. And I don't know. I can remember concerts where like we had a kid in the aisle conducting. And I don't know, you can decide, wow, that's so distracting and I can't believe they're doing that. Or you can say, oh my gosh, that kid feels so welcome and comfortable here. And they're so absorbed in what we're doing. Like, I think that's magic in a bottle. So I know not everybody feels the same way, but it's really trying to challenge these mindsets we have about what's okay at a concert. I think it is okay if a kid is like, this is what I want to do, So
yeah, absolutely. Aubrey, thanks so much for this. I don't want to keep you here all day, although I do want to keep you here all day. But how about a round of rapid fire questions before I let you go today?
Let's do it.
So what is a habit that you have that you think is in part responsible for your success?
Discipline. I am very disciplined, meaning, I talk about don't solicit somebody too soon for a donation. Let's segment our audience. Let's really cater to the customer, meaning like, what is that first timer experience? Like all of that is very disciplined. I guess I'll leave it at that. The discipline and iteration maybe would be the 2 things I say. That's not very rapid answer.
And checking your data.
Checking the data, yeah.
What doubts or resistance have you had to face on this journey, either internal or external? Talking about change always comes with resistance. In any context, change is hard, and that's the nature of change. So just really having to prove again and again and again that these ideas have been vetted, tested, authenticated multiple times, multiple organizations. And then some of that's gendered too, being an ambitious woman who wants to run a major company, there's definitely resistance to that. So yeah, in all of those ways, some resistance. Yeah. How about the skills that you think young musicians studying today should acquire in addition to learning to play their instruments?
Everything we've talked about. I mean, just consider what is what is the work when you're not playing? What is the way you could like just think more about the audience as you're performing? I mean, I think growing up, I was like this too. Like I performed because I took great enjoyment from it. But and that's true for probably all of us. But can we think beyond ourselves a little more as we're coming through the ranks growing up? And just I think that helps start to give us this empathy that we need then going into a professional phase of our lives to make those audience connections. So I think that's what I'd recommend.
I love that. What about a piece of advice that you received and you'd like to pass on to the listeners?
I think a great piece of advice I received is that the career path, goes right on the heels of the resistance, maybe the career path doesn't have to be quite so linear. I was very nervous originally to go from symphony to opera, which at the end of the day, we're selling tickets, we're raising money, orchestras play and both. Like, I mean, it's not that different, but I was nervous about that. And then nervous to go to a music festival. And I've learned over the years, and then go to a smaller regional orchestra, but I've learned over the years, no, I feel so much more enriched in my experiences because I have all that. And it's given me so much more to bring to every job and client I work with going forward. So maybe this is discipline to a fault. I thought I had to be on the path, and the path I had defined for myself was very narrow. And instead to break free of that and say, no. There's a lot of different ways we can do this, and success can look a lot of different ways, and true for performers as well. We don't have to all go in a job at a major symphony. That's just ridiculous. So,
yeah. And if I expand on this a little bit and go back to what we were talking about earlier, is how creative can we become in trying new things with our audience, with our programming, with how we achieve diversity, all of these things. Yeah. Pushing the envelope, breaking the mold.
Love it. Yes.
Finally, what is something that the listeners could do today to positively impact the future of the artistic and musical community? You've shared many good ones.
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate, if there's anything I have said that has resonated, follow that. Maybe that means, I'm going to put myself out there on social media a little more. Or maybe it means, next time the development team asks for some help with donors, I'm going to say yes to that. Yeah. Or maybe it's, wow, I serve on the players committee and I have thoughts on auditions. Like, we need musicians to help advance all of those things. So I would say pick anything that I said today that felt relevant and helpful to you, and take action on it.
I love this. That's so great. Aubrey, I'm going to put all of the information on how to find anything about you in the show notes, but is there anything that you want to share about maybe some upcoming fun projects that you have? And I know that you occasionally have some online group courses.
Yeah. Oh, you're so great setting me up to talk about all of this. Yes, please follow me online at Aubrey Bergauer on all the channels. I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn these days. And the website, aubreybergauer.com, as we said before. I do offer, in addition to my consulting work with organizations, often virtual courses. I've got one going on right now. The waitlist is now open if somebody is interested in doing that in the future. So yeah, please follow me in those places. I'm always putting out more content like this and would love to connect with you online.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things that I'm walking away with is getting involved, especially in the area of connecting with the audience, but also connecting with the management of any organization I'm involved with. Like, how can I contribute as well? And as you say, we're not trying here to provide free labor, but there are ways that we can do this in a way that is meaningful for us and will create, hopefully, a long-term, positive impact.
That's the goal. We can reverse the trends. We can do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Aubrey, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me. Thanks to everybody for watching. If you're watching live, for listening, if you're listening later, it's a good day. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Aubrey.